Officer Goodson was not at fault. While we agree with the verdict in this case against Officer Goodson, we also suggest that Mrs. Mosby reconsider her malicious prosecution against the remaining 4 officers. We are more than certain that they too will be found to be without guilt.
And that was Gene Ryan, president of Baltimore's Fraternal Order of Police, calling for State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby to drop the cases against the other officers following the recent acquittal of Officer Cesar Goodson, who was accused of giving Gray a rough ride and causing a deadly spinal injury. But according to the judge, the evidence presented didn't justify any kind of a murder charge. And for much more on this story, we are pleased to be welcome in President of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund, Ron Hosko, who's also a former FBI Assistant Director. Welcome to Newsmax Prime. Always a pleasure to have you. You were actually there witnessing some of the trial proceedings. What was your reaction?
Miranda, I was not surprised. I heard some testimony in the earlier trial against Officer Ed Nero. When we heard that verdict, we heard what Judge Williams had to say during the verdict. I heard some of the testimony in the Goodson case, was there yesterday, and the judge took apart this prosecution's painfully thin case, brick by brick, and I'm being kind in the use of the word brick. The evidence put forth by the prosecution was simply not there. This is not the sort of evidence that would sustain an indictment in a usual grand jury proceeding, let alone a trial environment where the proof is beyond a reasonable doubt.
So what do you think is next for the other officers facing charges? Because Goodson was the only officer who was actually facing a murder charge.
The Judge Williams telegraphed his punches, in my estimation. Unless the prosecution comes up with or has in its bag of tricks some dramatic new evidence that hasn't been handed over yet, Judge Williams is already telegraphing the direction. These officers certainly do have a responsibility to people in their custody. But in this case, there is no evidence that any officer put an angry hand on Freddie Gray, either when they were arresting him or during his transportation. And in fact, there is no evidence that any of these officers saw Freddie Gray in a state that should have compelled them to get immediate medical help until the final stop, when they did get immediate medical help. The compelling evidence in the case is that Freddie Gray, that his injuries were self-inflicted. Mm-hmm. There was another passenger in the other passenger compartment of the transport wagon. He was uninjured. His first reports to police were that it was a smooth ride and that he heard Gray banging in the other side of the prisoner wagon. So I think there's only one path here. And frankly, I'm going to go past what Gene Ryan had to say. I think it is time for the mayor of Baltimore, who famously said, with respect to the rioters, giving them room to destroy. I think she's given Marilyn Mosby enough room to destroy the reputation of the office and watch the destruction of her own reputation. And I think it's time for her to ask Marilyn Mosby to step down.
Do you think that she was, I mean, a lot of people have been talking about this. Do you think she acted too quickly on these charges?
Unquestionably. Here they've had a year to investigate thoroughly, to queue up their best evidence. And their best evidence is like smoke. It's like fog, that once you touch it and look at it and grab it, it's gone. There is no solid evidence to sustain convictions. I don't think they had it to begin with. This was absolutely a rush to judgment, and now Marilyn Mosby is left with egg on her face.
Now, we heard from a Gray family attorney as well. Let's play that if we can, and we want to get your reaction, Ron.
We still have an unaddressed police brutality problem, not just in this city, where very little has changed, but in this nation. And some of these police officers deserve, and I'm not speaking about the ones in this case, that would be improper, but some police officers deserve to go to jail for police brutality and other kinds of police misconduct.
And there you just heard from Billy Murphy, the lawyer of Freddie Gray. Your reaction to what he had to say?
Miranda, when police break the law and there is proof that they have broken the law, they should be held to account. Absolutely, that's true. We need trust between the communities and the police. Without that trust, when it breaks down, we see things that are happening across America today. That trust has been breaking down for a variety of reasons in Baltimore, in Chicago, in other cities across the country. And what we see is violent crime spiking upward. Huge spikes in D.C., in Baltimore, in Chicago, in Dallas, in Las Vegas. Very concerning spikes. So we need to rebuild this fabric of trust. It is not a one-way street. The police have made mistakes, but there are also those in the community that are opportunists, that are moving into the void as police start to pull back, certainly in Baltimore, where you have to be thinking in terms of, I do my job and I might be indicted and convicted because of somebody like Marilyn Mosby. Why should I be aggressive? Why should I be proactive? That's the very response that we need from police, particularly in these hard-bitten communities that have such great financial distress, joblessness, despair. We need more police in there. We certainly need more trust. And what we have now is, I think, a growing void, a growing gap between community and police. Some in the community begging for more police services, others taunting the police, coming up with cell phones, challenging the police, shouting them down, and creating a very difficult environment. And only opportunists and criminals are going to prosper in that environment.
With the only few seconds that we have remaining, Ron, I want to ask you real quickly. We've been talking a lot about Baltimore, but I want to talk about Orlando, obviously the largest mass shooting in American history. Are you concerned at all about lone wolves here in the United States?
Oh, very much so. There are folks who are disaffected. We certainly have a mental illness problem here in America that is a concern for law enforcement. And you have this issue about data collection and exploitation with encryption as a factor for the FBI and what they can't see. And there is a great opportunity for disaffected, angry, lost souls to see what happened in Orlando and try to match it. So I'm very concerned about it.
You mentioned mental illness. Following the Orlando shooting, as you know, Democrats labeled it a gun control failure. We've had 4 gun measures that have failed in the Senate. We've had a few proposals that have come up in the House. And of course, we had that House sit-in. Your take is a lack of gun control to blame?
No, we've seen, look, millions of Americans, hundreds of millions of Americans possess guns, carry guns very safely. They're used in their own self-defense. They're used for sporting purposes. So guns are reality in America. Guns are part of our environment. It's keeping guns and taking guns out of the wrong hands, in my estimation. And you can see the reporting, perhaps you're a part of it, across the country where we have strong gun laws on the books. And then we have lax enforcement. We have judges who are giving weak sentences. And so guys, the wrong people with guns are hitting the streets again and are emboldened because, hey, I just got away with it. I can do it again. All I have to do is not get caught firing the fatal rounds. So we have to take guns out of the wrong hands, not out of people like myself and sportsmen and hunters and trained law enforcement personnel, current or former. Take them out of the wrong people's hands and prosecute the wrong people who deserve to be prosecuted aggressively.
Ron Hosko, thanks so much for your time. Always a pleasure to have you here on Newsmax Prime.
Thanks, Miranda.
All right, you heard what Ron Hosko had to say about gun control, about the Freddie Gray case. We want to hear from you now. Again, the number to call is 1-877-NEWSMAX. And joining us now on the phone is Jim from Newcastle, Ohio. Jim, thanks so much for joining us here on Newsmax Prime. Or is it Suzanne? My apologies. You don't sound anything like Jim. But thank you for joining us here on Newsmax. What's your question?
I wanted to say that we have to give our police officers more credit than they are getting, because in this day and age, when they get up in the morning, they don't know if they're going to come home at night. Okay? And also, I attribute all these illegals that are coming to our United States. And the thing is, crime rises. I mean, when I watched the candidates, look at the way they behaved, and how are these police officers supposed to behave?
Right, you bring up some really good points, Suzanne. Thanks so much for joining us here on Newsmax Prime. Suzanne joining us there from Pennsylvania. You heard what Suzanne had to say. Again, we want to know what you think. Join the conversation by calling the number on your screen. That number is 1-877-NEWSMAX. Let us know. Gun control, Brexit. We'd love to hear from you. We'll be right back.